With less than 250,000 copies sold, the lowest Metacritic score, and a whopping 0 active amount of players on speedrun.com, Grand Theft Auto Advance is by far the worst performing game in the franchise. But is it actually that bad? Today I want to take a look at the game, what it brings to the table, the positives and negatives, what I found interesting and impressive, especially considering the hardware it was released on, and give my honest opinion on the game most people often overlook or not even know it exists. I have to preface the fact that I never played it myself prior to the making of this video, and it was always something I wanted to experience. So what better opportunity than now? Let's get into it. The game was developed by Digital Eclipse Studios in direct collaboration with Rockstar Games, so this wasn't the same situation as the Trilogy Abomination. Although Rockstar was actively participating in the writing and developing of the game, Advance would go on to become one of the first GTA games in which Dan Houser, known for directing as well as writing the stories of all the games prior and following, wouldn't be involved in at all. Maybe that has to do with the poor market performance it had, but I'm hoping that wasn't the case because GTA 6 will be the second time that happens. All jokes aside, the game was released only for the Game Boy Advance on October 26, 2004, and if that specific date rings any bell to you, it's because that's also when GTA San Andreas released. Talk about overshadowing something. Originally meant to be a port of GTA 3 to the Game Boy, Rockstar quickly scrapped the idea and went on to write and develop an entirely new story featuring a different protagonist, simply named Mike, while keeping the map of Liberty City almost intact, with a few changes and things getting removed, like the train tracks. This mostly had to do with the challenges the developers had with having to adapt the game to a 2D environment. Missions would have to be more limited and perhaps even play out differently, so the better choice was to start on a fresh canvas and build a new game around the hardware they had. Despite being a 2D game, the setting and the story take place in the 3D universe, 1 year prior to the events of GTA 3 in 2000. We even have returning characters like 8-Ball, Misty, and Asuka, with plenty more original ones. There's a bit of a confusion as to whether Advance is canon or not, but since Rockstar was heavily involved in the writing of the story, I think it's safe to assume it would be. And speaking of the story, the protagonist I mentioned earlier, named Mike, is a low-life thug that wants to get out of Liberty City with the money he's earned working for the Mafia. But his best friend Vinny takes on the Dutch Vanderlyn approach of one last job.
We just need money. One more decent take and we're gone.
And so you do a few of them before Vinny is apparently killed in a car bomb. Our friend Mike here then seeks to avenge his best friend as well as earning back the money that was also gone with Vinny. Thus we begin working with various characters like 8-Ball, which I've mentioned earlier, Johnny, and a few others to work our way up the criminal empire world. Similar to Claude, Mike doesn't really care who he works for as long as he gets paid, which means we end up taking jobs from rival gang lords, like King Courtney of the Yardies, Asuka, and Cisco, which is the former leader of the Colombian gang before Catalina took over. Near the end of the game, Vinny is revealed to have faked his death and betray Mike in order to keep all the money they earned to himself. We quickly take care of him and we go about our day. Then a few missions later we have an all-out war with King Courtney, which isn't killed or else GTA 3 wouldn't make sense, and then we fly off into the sunset and move to Colombia as the game suggests. It's not exactly Red Dead's level of storytelling and character development, but for a game with static cutscenes and not much else to work with, it's actually a pretty decent plot. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to GTA Chinatown Wars, a game that would release in 2009, also featuring Liberty City, but this time taking place in the HD universe, although it's missing Alderney entirely. This game, however, is on the opposite spectrum of things, as it was one of the most beloved handheld and GTA games in general, but it would end up selling just as poorly at approximately 1.2 million copies sold. Now, let's move on to the most important part of the video, the gameplay. Besides the main story, the game offers a significant amount of side content, mostly borrowed from GTA 3. The player has the choice of collecting the 100 hidden packages spread across the map, with each 10 of them collecting offering a new weapon at the safe house. Vehicle side missions like Taxi, Vigilante, Paramedic, or Firefighter, each with the respective reward, an entirely new minigame called Demolition Football. Rampages also make a return, with 21 of them being available on the map, as well as a bunch of street races you can do on each island. Unlike the previous titles, you can save your progress anywhere, not just at your safe house using a quick save feature, although you would just probably use save states on an emulator. But at the time it was insane, and we wouldn't see this again until GTA 5. And since I've mentioned save states and emulators, which in my case I'm using the MGBA emulator, you can upscale the resolution from the settings to make it more visually pleasing, as well as changing the basic controls to whatever suits you the best, which makes this game fairly playable on a keyboard, but if you prefer, you can do the same with a controller. Though accelerating with left control and only using the directional keys to turn left and right while driving did take a bit of time to get adjusted to, but it's not all that bad. However, having clunky controls and a poorly made combat system that is similar to what GTA 2 had made for a lot of moments where I got busted by the cops and failed a mission in certain situations. Though, unlike the first games, you can actually sprint and get some distance from the cops or your enemies, but I'd often forget about that. Also, the cops seem to spawn far more often than in any previous game, making chases and cruising the city with a wanted level a real challenge. Even on a lower wanted level, they seem to be quite common, but with a higher rating, they basically flood the streets. The heads-up display is better implemented here than in the 2D era games, with a full minimap and icons on it, a health and armor counter, as well as a speedometer when driving cars, which is the first and only time we've seen one in a GTA game. It also borrows a lot of assets from prior games, mostly car sounds and a few pedestrian lines, as well as the police radio from GTA 3 entirely. The game also doesn't feature radio stations. When you enter a car, a mashup of a couple of GTA 2 songs is playing on a loop. For the limitations this game had because of the abysmally low specs of the Game Boy Advance, the attention to details, which by now is a staple of the franchise, is somewhat kept even in this game, but at a much lower level. The game world is alive and it functions on its own without the need for the player to interact. Pads wreak havoc in the city, cars get stolen, and rival gang members fight each other. Ambulances spawn in response to that like in any other GTA game, showing how no corners were cut when it came to the open world environment. I also want to mention how stepping over a dead NPC's body leaves a bit of a blood trail behind the player. This might seem insignificant to you, but this goes to show you how dedicated Rockstar is at making amazing and detailed games, going as far as pushing the hardware to the absolute limit. Even back then, not many game developers would have spent their time, effort, and console resources on adding such seemingly useless details, and this is what I love about the franchise. So why did it sell so poorly though? Well, there's multiple factors that could have had some contribution in that. So let's look into them. As I've said in the beginning, the game was released on the same day as GTA San Andreas, completely overshadowing any relevance or excitement the public might have had about the game at the time. And a lot of people agree that the decision to release two games in one day affected the sales of Advance, and had it came a month or maybe two before SA, it might have sold more copies. But it's Rockstar we're talking about, and also Take-Two, their parent company. I highly doubt Rockstar made this decision without knowing they might shoot themselves in the foot and lose sales on a game of their own, and from arguably the biggest franchise in gaming. I tend to believe it was a deliberate decision to release them on the same day. Who knows, maybe if it came out before SA, people would have lost hype for it. After all, the game doesn't really improve on the GTA formula, nor does it bring new and unique mechanics like Chinatown Wars did with the drug dealing minigame. We also have to factor in the platforms the game was ported on, or a lack thereof. The name speaks for itself. Since it was intended to be on the Game Boy exclusively, it didn't reach that many gamers that could have possibly bought the game. The portable console itself didn't do so bad. Reportedly, by December 1st, 2006, it had sold over 33.6 million units in the United States alone. So there was definitely a large enough market for the game to sell relatively well, but it ended up being the lowest selling game in the entire franchise. Now, is the game actually bad? Yes, when compared to literally every other GTA, but as an individual game, no. It's a matter of competing against the best of the best, and the competition is really fierce. It's a really solid game overall, and it takes full advantage of the Game Boy's power. For their first attempt at making a handheld GTA game, Rockstar, along with the studio they hired, managed to create a good story, decent gameplay, and check all the standards that make a GTA game. I know technically it wasn't the first time they made a handheld game, as both GTA 1 and 2 were ported over to the Game Boy Color, but I'm not going to count those. A year later, they made Liberty City Stories for the PSP, followed by Vice City Stories another year after that, truly cementing their capability of creating amazing games for the portable consoles. Definitely worth a play for those like myself who never tried the game and wanted to give it a shot. Although a game I wouldn't really jump down into again very soon, it's worth trying it once to see what Rockstar was able to achieve on a Game Boy. And thanks to the folks over at Internet Archive, you can access it, as the game is literally abandonware, so you can avoid the dark corners of eBay where the game is listed at insane prices. I definitely had a good time exploring this game for the first time, and hopefully this inspires you to do so if you've never tried it. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment down below your thoughts, and if you want to see more of my content, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching.